What's up, guys? Justin here with the SketchUp-essentials.com. So SketchUp 2026 is here, and in this video we're going to check out all the things that were added in this new release. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. And so first off, you can download the new version by going to Help, check for update, and it'll go through and check to see if the update is available for you. Now, obviously it's not available for me because I've already installed it, but that's how you can find it. You can also find more information about the new release by going to the Trimble SketchUp What's New page, or by going to the detailed release notes, which is usually where I like to go in order to find out things about the new features contained inside of a new version. As always, I would recommend keeping the older version installed on your computer until you've had a chance to go through and test out how stable it is for you. And so first off, this is probably the largest new feature that they've added is they've added this new collaboration mode. And so the way the collaboration mode works is it gives multiple people the ability to view and comment in a model. Like for example, there's an option here to add a comment. Well, if I click in here, notice how it's going to tell me to save the model to the cloud to share and comment. So we're going to click on save, and we're going to save this to Trimble Connect. We'll come back to this in a second, but I love this new tab, which we'll talk about. But first off, we're going to do a don't purge. We'll just save this as a SketchUp 2026 model. Notice how it gives me this note that it's saving it to the cloud. Now, what we can do is we can go inside of our model and we can pick a view. And for example, say that we wanted to add something here, you can click on it and you can add a comment. So in this case, I'm going to add the option for add handrail right here. And I'm going to click on send. And so what that does is that adds a comment in here. And so anyone that has access to the project can see the different comments. And so in addition to having the ability to add comments inside of a SketchUp model, you can also click on this option for share, which is going to generate a share link for your model. That's going to give anyone, even if they don't have a license for SketchUp, the ability to access this model. Okay, and so now if you want to share this, you can either invite people by email or you can just share the link. And so once you send the invite, you're going to get an email like this that asks if you want to join their contacts. And I'm going to go ahead and click on join. And then once you do that, you're going to be able to access this model right here. And so the cool thing about this is we do have the ability to access the model from multiple different locations, from multiple different people, and you can see where they're at. And so this isn't necessarily the best view because it's just me and me, but you can see how as I move my mouse around inside of the 3D space, I can actually see where that mouse is, but you can also set this where people follow that current view. So for example, if I was to click in here and click on bring everyone to me over here, and then fly around, notice how it kind of syncs the view that I have on the left to the view on the right here. So it gives me the ability to show people around the model as well as view all the comments. And you can do that inside of the free viewer. So as a collaboration tool, this has some interesting applications. Another thing that's interesting to me is if you do have all of these different comments in here, like multiple users can leave comments, right? So for example, say I wanted to leave a comment as the SketchUp Essentials rather than Justin at the SketchUp Essentials, I could come in here and I could add a comment and say change roof to black right here. And that comment is going to pop up in here and everyone can see it, right? So if I go into my SketchUp Pro version over here, then I can actually click on those comments and see what they are. So you can collaborate on this in real time, which I think has some interesting applications. Now, a couple other things about this. So one of the things that I really like that's actually interesting to me is this gives me the ability to, within these comments, you can open it up and you can also add other comments. So for example, make the rail stainless. Right here, you can click in order to do that, but you could also add a picture or a photo. So say that you had a product type, you could drag a photo in right here, and you can leave a comment associated with that. And that means that anyone that has access to this model can go in and view that comment and see all the notes associated with it. Another place where this might be interesting is if you had like job walk photos or something like that of different things and you had a model of a space, you could add photos in there as well. So one of the things I like about this is if you do share a link and you decide that you only want to show scenes. So for example, say that I've got this scene right here. So view, animation, add scene, view, animation, add scene. Right here, we'll just add a couple scenes in here like this. So I've got a few different scenes in here and I'm just going to save this And again, we'll look at this in a second. But if I go in here and I click on the option to share and I create a share scenes only link like this, I can copy the link. Okay, and so notice how if you join through a link that only gives you scene access, then all you can do is just click across the different links and just see different scenes. So if you don't want people flying around the model, but you want to highlight a couple different things in your scene, this is a good way to do that. Notice how this is like completely locked down where they can only see what I want them to see inside of this view right here. Now you can still see the cursors that are inside of the 3D space from the different users, but if they join from a scenes only link, they can only see the scenes that you click on here. So this is one I'd actually really like to hear your feedback on. So make sure you leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about this and if you'd use it or not. So that's kind of interesting to me. I can think of a few places where I'd use it. Like I could use it to document existing conditions. And also I like the scene sharing link. I don't know how much I would use the actual having multiple users flying around in a scene, but I'd love to hear from you if that's something you'd use a bunch. So leave a comment below and let me know. Okay, so next up is an improvement that I really like when it comes to the styles in SketchUp. So I've talked a bunch in the channel about how much I like the ambient occlusion function inside of the styles. Remember, you can go into edit, you can go to faces, you can toggle on ambient occlusion right here. What that ambient occlusion does is it gives you the ability to add these dark highlights at the crevices, right? And I'll really crank this up just so you can see this. So it does a really good job of adding this visual emphasis in your scene. I really like it for like top-down plan views and adding depth. And so one of the problems we had with it in the past, and we'll use this Micropolis from Botos Andros, just so you can kind of see, if you had a large model in here, with a whole bunch of space, right, that took up a whole bunch of space like this. So if you had something really big, the problem was the ambient occlusion was very small and you couldn't see it, right? So if you took your distance all the way up, you couldn't really see it because the ambient occlusion only went about this far away from those bases. So even if I crank that intensity up, as soon as you zoom way out, you can't really see it. But sometimes you want that for larger models. So what they've done is they've added a distance multiplier in here. What the distance multiplier does is it gives you the ability to multiply how far out the ambient occlusion goes right here. So even in large models, you still have the ability to add ambient occlusion in the space. And so that's really cool because you can now add that visual emphasis to everything. And this is kind of one of the unique things is how easy it is to set this up in SketchUp. And so the other cool thing about this, and we'll just use this garden by Ahmed G right here, is not only do you have the ability to add the distance multiplier now, you also have the ability to adjust the color. So say that we were to look at this right here, we're going to add ambient occlusion. I'm going to go ahead and crank it up so that I can see it, right? We'll use the distance multiplier so we get even more of it, and we'll crank up that intensity. But you also have the ability now to pick a different color for the ambient occlusion. So say that you liked like a white or maybe a red or something like that, and we're going to bring the distance back down just so you can see this, but you can now use this in order to add ambient occlusion for different colors, which gives you really interesting possibilities for adding like green highlights and things like that, right? Notice how I can now add a highlight around objects or other things using the color picker and the ambient occlusion. So that's really an interesting one to me because of the way that it allows you to add this kind of like new kind of visual emphasis right here. So I can crank this up or down like this, but it almost adds a glow around objects, which I think is really cool. And I'm really interested to see how people are going to be able to use the color picker of the ambient occlusion. It just gives you another style option. And one of the things I love about SketchUp is the style option. All right. So, and then last year, or in the last release, I think it was this year, the new rendering engine came out, and one of the complaints that a lot of people had about it was the fact that the material previews didn't look very good. So what we have now is we have the option, if we right click in here, to change between a cube thumbnail and a flat thumbnail. Now, I don't think we have the option to change the thumbnails down here to flat thumbnails, but you can view those thumbnails up here, and notice how it's significantly better being able to actually see what those are up here. I do kind of wish we had the ability to toggle them down below, and I don't think that we do right now, so that would be something that would be kind of nice to see a little bit later, is actually seeing those thumbnails come in down here. But we do have the ability to change the thumbnail up here so you can actually see what the material is as you pick it. which to me is really valuable because the cubes are just kind of hard to see, right? It's just kind of really hard to tell what something is using just the cubes up here. So being able to, the roofing is a great example. If I go to a flat thumbnail, I can actually see what the image is in here rather than the cubes over here. Though I do think people would also like the ability to toggle these to flat thumbnails as well. And so there's also an option inside of your materials. If you go down to edit, we added the option to invert the roughness map, which to me, I think is something that's really helpful because we're doing a fair amount of like trial and error in here with trying to get materials to look the way they're supposed to look. This invert option is going to give you the ability to toggle the dark and the light in the roughness map. So it'll basically swap out, or it'll invert the darks to the lights and the lights to the dark, which with some materials can make them look a little bit better, a little bit more realistic. So it's kind of a fun one to play around with. So it just gives you another option for the way to kind of like mess around with the way that your materials look in here like this. And it's really easy to check or uncheck the box. So I personally like that one. Obviously your mileage might vary on that depending on what you're trying to do, but I think it's a fun option. Okay, so next up is a feature that I think could be really interesting. And this is something that I think should have been included in live components for a long time, so I'm glad they're adding it. So they've added the ability to use the scale tool with live components. So basically what that means is with any models that have been built with the scalability, you can actually scale them to have them resize into openings, kind of like you could with things like you could with dynamic components. Now, obviously, this gives you more functionality in the sense that you also have all these other options like sliders and things like that for the live components. So being able to drop those in and scale them to fit, I think is really valuable. Now, one thing I will say though is as of right now, I can't seem to find any of them in the 3D warehouse to actually demo. So they have to be built to have this functionality inside of Trimble Creator. I'm not seeing a lot or really any options right now in the warehouse of stuff that they have in there that can actually do this. So this is something that I do think is going to be valuable, but there just need to be more of these developed in order to be able to do that. So I'm hoping this is the first step in having more interaction with your model in the future. I'd love to have live components be able to interact with things like paths and faces and things like that. But at the moment, this is a good first step. Personally, I'm probably still going to be using dynamic components just because the authoring to me is much simpler. But this is an interesting development, and I'll be keeping an eye out for models that are actually available in the 3D warehouse to try out and kind of demo in the future. And so in addition, they've also improved the live components in the sense that you can now apply different materials to them. So I can come in here with the paint bucket tool and apply materials to different parts and pieces of this live component in here. So that is definitely something that is valuable. And so being able to paint materials on those live components definitely makes them a more valuable skill or tool in my opinion. Okay, so another thing they've added, and I think people are going to be kind of mixed on this. I personally think it's a good thing, but I think other people might not. So when you use the scale tool, so using a scale tool is fine as long as you can see the model, right? But if you're ever in a place where you can't see the model like this and you still want to scale something, notice how previously what would happen is it would block those grips, and then you're kind of doing this like look around and see if you can find the grips thing inside of your model. But now what happens is if your scaling box is occluded or blocked by another object, it's going to pop up these little boxes that you can see. So now you can scale things even if you're behind a wall without having to look for those grips. So I personally do like this as a feature. I'm interested to see what everyone else is going to think, but I spent a lot of time trying to find grips on the backside of objects. So having these all pop up, even if they're blocked by something else, to me is going to be a time saver. But I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Okay, so they've also done something which I think makes sense. So most of you, if you've ever tried to rotate an object using the bounding box inference grips or inference crosses that show up, you use the move tool, right? You mouse over an object and then these little grips show up that you can use in order to rotate an object. So they've added those grips to the rotate tool now. So if I activate the rotate tool and move over a face, notice how those grips show up. So that's actually something that makes sense to me because it does feel like something that should pop up. I like that it pops up when you use the move tool, but it seems like those grips should also show up when you pop up the rotate tool as well. So kind of a small quality of life improvement, but it does give you access to those quick rotational functions using the rotate tool, which is kind of something you would kind of expect when using that tool. Okay, so next up is a feature that sounds like kind of a small deal, but to me, it's definitely a big deal. So if you've ever picked up like a plan view or something like this that you've got set up and ready to take in the layout, and you accidentally, you rotate out, you're working, and then you accidentally right click and you update the scene, that's really frustrating because there was no way to go back. And now your plan view, for example, has been saved to an isometric view. However, there's now the option to undo that update to the scene. So notice how if I do an undo, so edit, undo, update scene right here, now that scene gets the old camera view back. I know that feels like a small thing, but if you've ever dealt with that, it's very frustrating. That can definitely be a huge time saver of you not having to go back and like reset up a whole bunch of views or anything like that. So definitely excited about that one. Okay, so this next one is going to be super helpful if you use templates, right? Because the way that the purge unused function works is when you purge things that are in your model, anything that's not actively applied to something in your model gets purged out, right? So either if you do a file save, so if I do a file save right here, it's going to pop up the purge unused, or if you do a window model info statistics and do a purge unused, previously it would just purge everything. Well, now you have the ability to set what it's going to purge, right? So you can check these different boxes in here and you can say, okay, I only want you to purge unused components and nothing else, or unused components and environments, which environments are one of the big offenders for making your models a lot bigger. So now you can check what it's going to purge. So you can just uncheck the box for tags. That means it's not going to purge your unused tags. So now you don't have to come up with a template file that has geometry that you apply those tags to in order to keep them in when you purge. Now you can just uncheck the box for tags and you can just purge everything else. So having selections of what you purge is actually a massive update in the way that you purge objects in your model. Definitely excited about this one. So kind of a small one, but if you've ever closed out of one of these windows on the right-hand side, you've always had to go up to Window, Default Tray, and then toggle that back on. Now, if you right-click in the headers, you can just toggle those on from over here, which makes a ton of sense. That's something that I think is going to be really good for beginners, because when something kind of went away, they're like, well, how do I get it back? Well, now you just right-click in here and you just get it back, right? I can right-click and do the outliner, but I could also, if I didn't want the outliner, I could just right-click in here and toggle it off as well. Okay, so I don't have this issue going on right now, but I have plenty of time. So if you ever work on like multiple different computers, you know that sometimes when you have logged in a couple different places, you have to go down this rabbit hole, or you used to, of going to like the web-based version of your license authorization to trying to reset those authorizations or those licenses in order to get access on your computer. Well, now you have the ability, there's just a button that you can click. And what this button is going to do is this is going to basically clear all your other sessions and authorize this one. So instead of you having to go online and manage your activations, you can just click the button right here to clear all your other authorizations, and you can just log in on this computer. So that one is long overdue, and I'm very excited to see that. Okay, so they also made some improvements and changes to layout. So this is layout 2025, right? And it looks somewhat like SketchUp, but it's got a little bit of a different user interface. So even the icons and toolbars and things like that look different. So everything looked a little bit different, and it was just a little bit clunky, right? You couldn't pull these individual windows out. You had to create kind of your own trays and all of that. It was just, it was an older interface for sure. And so in layout 2025, what they've done is they've changed it to look a lot more like SketchUp looked, right? So like, for example, all the icons look a lot similar. It functions. So the functions of the tools themselves are not significantly different, but basically they've taken that user interface and kind of matched it up with the SketchUp user interface like this. Now, one cool thing about this is if you look over in the tray, what you can do is you can actually drag things out of the tray just as windows like this. So for example, if you wanted to have your SketchUp model window over here, you can just drag it out. Then when you want to bring it back, you can just drag it in over here. So overall, the user interface looks and acts a lot more like SketchUp. So you can also right click in here and you can pop up your different toolbars and things like that. And you can click and drag them around the screen as well. You can see how this just looks a lot more like SketchUp. So that doesn't massively change the functionality, but it does, like, it can be confusing when you're switching between different user interfaces. So having everything align a lot better, I think, is a good next step. And so there's a few new drafting tools inside of Layout that I actually really like. So let's say that we have lines in here like this. We'll add another line over here, and then say we add a line right here. So previously you would have to like really mess around with these lines and edges in order to get them to intersect properly, and to get like, you would have to come in here and kind of click and drag this in order to get everything to align. Well, now we have the option over here to both trim and extend edges, right? So the trim function is going to take an edge and it's going to trim it on the other side of an object right here, like this. So that's definitely something that's super valuable, being able to trim, but you can also extend. So you can take edges and you can extend them, and they'll basically extend out to wherever that next edge is, right? So if I had an edge over here and I use the extend function, notice how that's going to give me the ability to extend this to where it intersects with another line. So we also have the ability to fillet and chamfer corners. And so say that you had a couple edges like this, what you can do is you can click either the fillet or the chamfer. You can come in here and you can click on the two edges, and then you can type in a value, right? So in this case, say that I was to type in 12 or 24, it would kind of fillet or chamfer that, or this one is going to fillet the edge, but you could also chamfer it. So for example, right here, if we were to use the chamfer function, you can click this edge, then you can type in a value. So I'll type in a value of 12 or 24 or something like that. You can use that in order to add that to your different corners and edges right here. And we could always go in here and turn the fill off in order to get this to be just an edge in here like this. Those are definitely features that from a drafting standpoint will be really helpful. It would be nice to see the trim and extend functions added to SketchUp itself. And honestly, a bevel or fillet tool would be nice too. But we do now have those in layout, which that is something that has been kind of time consuming when it comes to creating your title blocks and everything like that in layout. And so another thing I will be testing is we should be seeing a significant speed increase in layout just based on the way that the code works. So your vector and hybrid rendering should be a lot faster. I have not had a chance to test this yet, so I don't know how much faster, but I'll be interested to see what people report back on this one. So they've also upgraded the scrapbook library over here. So now we've got different doors and things like that that you can drag in. Now this one's a little bit interesting to me. Like, I think being able to drag these in is definitely helpful. So it's definitely nice to see some improvements to the scrapbooks, but I'm not 100% clear on how this fits into the workflow, right? Because I'm modeling windows in 3D and then bringing them over into layout. So I'm taking a section cut across the building and I'm using the window geometry to create this. So I'm not going to be dragging in things like windows and doors from layout itself. So it is nice to have these. So I do definitely like the styles in here. I could see you doing interesting things with like these two-dimensional furniture and things like that. But at the same time, a lot of this is stuff that you're kind of managing over in SketchUp. So I haven't quite figured out how this would fit into a workflow, or even if it should, right? Like another example is having things like this stove, or this oven. So I could definitely bring in a two-dimensional stove or oven inside of layout in my elevations, but I'm probably going to have a 3D stove in SketchUp anyway. So these are definitely nice to have, and they could let you create some kind of cool stylized stuff. But for the actual modeling of those things, I'm managing a lot of that inside of SketchUp. I'd love to hear what you think about the new scrapbook library over here. Maybe people are going to use it, but it's something that doesn't really fit into my workflow. Okay, so there have also been improvements in DWG imports in SketchUp. So there's a number of different things in here, like hatch support, as well as the select import line work flattened, which is interesting to me because it basically sets the Z value of everything to 0. So that will probably help with cleanup when you're importing CAD files. What I don't know is if it's any better at creating faces when you do that, because I know a lot of the issue with a CAD file is you bring it in and the faces don't always close. I have no idea if this actually improved that, but there are other DWG improvements. Now, to me, I don't do a whole lot of DWG import. I also don't do a whole lot of DWG export. So it's not going to affect my workflow, but maybe it'll affect yours. So let me know what you think about it. And so there have also been improvements in layout to the export of DWG files. And again, this is not something that I do, so I haven't really tested this, but you can now accurately export text, hatches, and tables to DWG. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below if you use the DWG export from layout, if this is something that makes your life better, because it's just something I don't really have enough expertise to to test and really know if it's going to make things a whole lot better. All right, and then finally, I don't use Scan Essentials either. I don't really scan things, and when I do, I bring in like LiDAR scans or something like that. But if you do use Scan Essentials, there's some interesting new tools for texture projection and surface mesh. So you can extract a texture from your scan and project it onto your SketchUp geometry, which does have some kind of like interesting applications. So I have not tested this. I don't really have the proper files to test this, but I could see that definitely being interesting, of being able to take that image and just project it onto a surface. I do kind of wonder if there's not something like that that works without using Scan Essentials. Probably not, because you'd need to use the point data in order to figure out where the surfaces go, but that's definitely interesting. There's also a surface mesh tool that allows you to select portions of a mesh and then generate a surface. And again, because I don't have any point data or anything like that, I don't really have a way to test this. So again, if you do use this and you want to give it a try, let me know what you think in the comments down below.